Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, more judgment than luck. How Mathieu van der Poel and Pauline Ferrand-Prévot won Paris-Roubaix, but did those races live up to expectations? I'll also be looking back at the Tour of the Basque Country, which had a very popular winner. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that some so-called bike racing fans should be given a jail term and then a restraining order so they can't ever go within 10k's of a race. An idiot of the highest order, and I would use stronger language if I could, threw a full bead on at Mathieu van der Poel in Paris-Roubaix yesterday, hitting him full in the face with it. We also learnt that Paris-Roubaix is still the most brutal race of the year. This photo of Stefan Kung just about sums up how tough it is. He rolled across the line in 43rd place, looking bruised and battered from head to toe. Today, Pogačar was also bruised and battered, but only because the very expensive watch he was wearing had vibrated so much on his wrist over the cobbles, it had drawn blood, and quite a lot of it. And finally, we learnt that yesterday we had the best photo finish of all time. I mean, it's a bit of a giveaway as to who won the race, so I'll dive straight into that. Mathieu van der Poel just cemented his place in the history books, becoming the first rider since Francesco Moser 45 years ago to win Paris-Roubaix 3 years in a row. He's the fourth rider in history to have taken 6 titles across Flanders and Roubaix, putting him equal with Cancellara and Museo, with only Tom Boonen having 1 more. As per usual, he did it in style, with elegance and a large amount of grit, particularly in the closing kilometres of the race. So let's break down how the race was won, as it was a very different race to 12 months ago, despite the same solo winner. And I'll start with the early break. So in our preview show, we talked about the fact it's been taking longer and longer for the early break to form in the men's race, because everyone knows it's such a big advantage to be up the road in this race specifically. But then yesterday, it went way earlier than I was expecting. A strong group of 8 formed after just 30k's of racing, and 2 of those 8 would go on to finish in the top 10. Now the conditions made it a different race as well. Overnight rain had left plenty of muddy patches on the cobbles, which added an extra dimension to the race. Ineos Grenadiers were in the driving seat as they hit the first stretch of cobbles, but that was about as good as it got for them. Filippo Ganna punctured there, and they spent the rest of the day on the back foot. Lidl Trek were aggressive in those early stages too, despite Jasper Stuyven crashing out of contention. Alpecin were always there, but not pressing on like they did last year. But my eyes, like many others, were fixated on Pogačar in those early sectors. How was his positioning? How was his bike handling in the bunch over the cobbles and the corners? And the answers really were all positive. He was barely out of the top 10, looked comfortable and confident, and for the most part had teammates around him too. Fast forward a few sectors, you've got Mads Pedersen attacking on Avelair-Walleur, but it's Pogačar that counters. They both want to thin things down before the Arenberg Forest. Pogačar goes again on the Arenberg, but then Mathieu van der Poel puts in his first dig towards the end of that sector, and he carries it on afterwards too. Pogačar had to work really hard there just to stay in contact. At that point, Van Aert looks out of the picture, and actually Matt Brennan of Visma Leasebike looked the strongest of that team, or certainly the one positioning himself the best. The winning move came soon after that actually, at 87k's to go. Van der Poel attacks on a tarmac section, Pogačar reacts, but he uses up a bullet to do so, whilst Pedersen, Philipsen and Bissegger are the only others able to follow. And it's quite interesting looking back at that specific point. Filippo Ganna was gapped and eventually had to flick the elbow because he couldn't close that gap, and that was the end of that. Now the next thing we see is Pogačar seemingly really suffering. He's grimacing, he's stretching, he's desperately asking for his team car, which was allowed to come up to him when the gap wasn't really big enough for the commissaires to allow it. He took what was the same bottle, I presume, as he did at the World Championships last year, so it seems like he was cramping. Whatever's in that bottle though, it looks like it works, doesn't it? With 71k's to go, he attacks over the cobbles, and with Bissegger unable to follow him, Pedersen is forced to close the gap. Now the problem is, Pedersen's on his limit, so he hits a couple of the stones really hard and punctures out of that front group. Race over, which was such a shame for him, and actually such a shame for the whole race. By the end of that sector, Pogačar is with Mathieu van der Poel, But he refuses to work because he's got Philipsen close behind. So with 65k's to go, we've got 2 Alpecin and Pogačar fighting for the win. And so we get to the second 5-star sector, Mons-en-Pévèle. Van der Poel puts in a dig, which really only serves to distance his teammate. Pogačar sees that and puts him to the sword. Van der Poel once again refuses to work initially at that point, then he gets the go-ahead from the car behind to work. So we've got the dream scenario really, the top 2 favourites of the race, at least by the bookmakers' odds, riding mano a mano. Can Pogačar do the unthinkable and drop Mathieu van der Poel on flat roads? Well, we never got to find out. Pogačar went so fast into a right-hander that he overshot it. It looked initially like he'd got away with it, then he hits a hole in the grass and crashes. Only softly, but it's enough for him to drop his chain and therefore require a spare bike. Van der Poel doesn't wait, and he shouldn't wait. That was entirely Pogačar's fault. Poggi closes the gap then from 25 seconds down to about 12, but whilst he's going into the red, Van der Poel isn't. And so like E3 the last 2 years, he starts slowly but steadily increasing his advantage over a lone chaser. And I'd still love to know how much of that is calculated and how much is just down to the chaser being so desperate to make contact again. But that effectively was the race done. His gap was so big by the time he punctured on Carrefour de l'Arbre that even that wasn't a huge panic for him. I mean, he was clearly suffering a lot in the closing stage of the race, but he rode on to his 3rd Roubaix win and his 6th straight podium at a monument. Pogačar finished 2nd, an incredible ride for someone on debut and someone who's still focused on Grand Tours, and for someone that weighs a lot less than 70 kilograms. Behind them, Pedersen won the sprint for 3rd ahead of Wout van Aert, who finished the 2nd straight Sunday looking much stronger at the end of the race than he did at the crunch point of it. And so it was a race that didn't produce that thrilling finale that a lot of us had hoped for, but there was still enough action to make it a decent addition. And I was thinking about this again yesterday. We always want excitement towards the end of bike races, and because all bike races have a set finish line, we often get it. Maybe a little less so in this modern era, which is why I think there's a debate about how interesting it really is. But in most major team sports, the win can be decided well before the end of the event. Football, American football, basketball, etc. They're all hugely popular spectator sports that can be decided some way before the whistle goes. And cycling is no different in some ways. We might want action and unknowns and excitement towards the end, it just doesn't always happen. Anyway, another fantastic win for Van der Poel. Despite the conditions yesterday, it was still the 2nd fastest edition in Paris-Roubaix history, 46.921 kilometers per hour average for the winner. And it means that both Van der Poel and Pogačar have finished on the podium of exactly 2/3 of the monuments they've started, which is ridiculous. Pogačar has now finished on the podium of the last 7 monuments that he started, and the 8th was Liège-Bastogne-Liège, which he crashed out of in 2023, having won the Tour of Flanders 2 weeks prior. He's the first reigning Tour de France champion to finish on the podium of Paris-Roubaix since Eddy Merckx did it in 1975, 50 years ago. I do feel for Mads Pedersen though. He must be just thinking, what if, at this point. But at the same time, I can't help but feel you make your own luck at Paris-Roubaix. It's not that Mathieu van der Poel has had great luck 3 years in a row. His bike handling not only allows him to save energy, but also his equipment. Yes, he punctured on Carrefour, but in general, he literally steers clear of punctures and he never seems to crash. So I'd give the race a 4 out of 5 for excitement. Let me know your score in the comments section down below. Behind that front 4, Florian Vermeers did a brilliant job for Pogačar and still finished 5th. Then it was Ruch in 6th, he survived from the early breakaway, as did Hurgaard in 8th. Bissegger did the ride of his life to take 7th, Wright was 9th and Rex 10th. Okay, on to the women's from Saturday, in which Lotte Kopecky and teammate Lorena Wiebes started as favourites for the win. Live coverage didn't start until just before the first cobbled sector, and there we saw it was Lidl Trek doing the controlling behind a 2-woman breakaway. They clearly had a plan, and it wasn't long before we found out what the next part of that plan was. With 71 k's to go, Ellen van Dijk puts in a massive attack coming off a cobbled sector. The problem was, it came at just over the halfway point of the race, and it just hadn't really been hard enough up to that point. which in turn meant there were a lot of riders in that group behind that were still fresh enough to work, not just the team leaders, but also their domestiques, which meant Van Dijk was burning a lot of energy and she never really got more than 30 seconds on the main favourites behind. She was still dangling off the front when a big crash happened on the entry into Sector 12, which caused a split behind, but it was there that Kopecky put in a big move with Wiebes glued to her wheel. And for a brief moment, it looked like the race might already be over. They caught Van Dijk, but behind them, Vos was putting in an almighty effort to close what was a huge gap. Like, I cannot overstate how strong she must have been there to do that. Now, the biggest surprise there was Jelena Erik of Movistar, who had the ride of her life on Saturday. So for a short time, we had a very select group at the front that also included Dijkert and former winner Alison Jackson. But with a lack of cohesion amongst that group, a few came together behind with around 35 k's to go. The next big move came from Lidl Trek again, who'd looked completely out of the game for a while. Emma Norsgaard flew the coup and ended up clawing out an advantage of almost a minute, whilst everyone took the opportunity to eat and drink behind. That gap was down to 20 seconds though, when what turned out to be the winning move was made. So on a small rise on one of the roads between sectors, Pauline Ferrand-Prévot of Visma Lease bike attacked, and there was just enough hesitation that she quickly had a sizable gap. Zoe Bagstedt of Canyon SRAM Zonda Crypto tried to close it, but it was already at a point where it was too large to close in one short, sharp effort. We didn't know it at the time, of course, but it soon became evident it was likely to be the winning move. She caught Norsgaard pretty quickly, and whilst they swapped turns together for a while, Norsgaard eventually paid for her effort and was dropped with just under 20 k's to go. At that point, the gap was 30 seconds, and it also became clear that ST Work had burnt most of their matches. Kopecky ended up working for Wiebes that day, but by that point, it was too little too late. Ferrand-Prévot was off and enjoying a 1 minute lead over the other favourites as she exited Carrefour de l'Arbre. She entered the Roubaix Velodrome with plenty of time to sit up and celebrate her first win since returning to road racing. And what a way, what a race to do it on. World champion on the road, cyclocross, mountain bike and gravel, Olympic champion, and now Paris-Roubaix winner at the first time of trying. She's the first female French winner of the race ever, and the first French winner full stop since 1997. What a legend of the sport she is. She may not know what handlebar width she's riding, but she does know how to ride a bike.
What handlebar width do you have? Do you know?
Oh, I have no idea. 52 maybe? It's possible?
It's not possible, no. 52 would be very wide.
I'm totally wrong then. Maybe it was on MTB then.
Behind Ferrand-Prévot, Letizia Borghese got away from the chase group to take second, whilst Wiebes won the sprint for third. Now, that was a great result for EF Education Oatly, who looked really good the whole day. Vos was incredibly disappointed as she crossed the line not to take the third step of the podium, but then she was overjoyed for her teammate when she greeted her soon after. That was great to see. Alison Jackson was fifth. She loves that race, doesn't she? Then it was Confalonieri, Shabby, Dijkert, Balsamo and Consonni making up the rest of the top 10. Hats off to Pfeiffer Georgie too. She had a puncture at a really bad moment in the race and then a crash later on, but she still got back on and finished 13th on the day. Kat Ferguson, though, was victim of a crash that was apparently caused by a spectator stepping onto the cobbles. Again, something that shouldn't be happening, but still does. It ended her race. Don't forget, you can watch a full season of bike racing live on Discovery Plus and Max. I hope you all enjoyed the weekend of racing as much as I did. I thought it was brilliant. Right, I'm going to move on to the Tour of the Basque Country now, which also produced some really exciting racing last week. I'll start by skipping straight to the overall winner though and say well done Joao Almeida of UAE Team Emirates. I mean, there's been a lot said about the fact he hadn't won a stage race overall since he joined that team at the end of 2022. Well, now he has. And when you look at his stage race results over the last 3 or 4 years, you've got to say there's not really any rider that deserves that win more. So since joining UAE, he has started 19 stage races and he's finished all but one of them in the top 10. That anomaly was Paris-Nice last year, in which he finished 11th. And in 10 of them, he's finished on the podium, but it wasn't until Saturday that he was on the top step. I mean, it's a level of consistency that you very rarely see. He's also, as far as I can see, never pulled out of a stage race, even since his junior days. Anyway, it started with an individual time trial in which Almeida finished a close second to Max Schachmann of Soudal Quickstep. And it emerged afterwards, a few people noticed this online, that those two are very difficult to separate in time trials. Schachmann won on that day by 0.54 of a second. At Algarve this year, Schachmann beat Almeida by 0.05 of a second. At the Worlds last year, Schachmann beat him by 0.06 of a second. And in the Olympics in 2021, they finished level on time too. Quite incredible how close these two are. In fact, almost spooky. Schachmann and his team Soudal Quickstep did a great job of defending over the first few stages of that race. The first of those was fairly simple, to be fair, the only sprint stage of the race. That was won by Ineos Grenadiers' Caleb Ewan, who promptly went home the next day. Spanish champion Alex Aramburu crossed the finish line first on stage 3 into Biarritz, only to be relegated for taking a shortcut at the finish, and then reinstated after Paul Romain Gregoire of Groupama FDJ had already been made to go to the podium presentation as the winner. It was a bit of a farce really, but ultimately I think the correct decision was made. The initial decision was made because he went the wrong way through a signposted roundabout, but then a subsequent look at the roadbook and Velo viewer showed that the line Aramburu had taken was the line that was shown to him before the race. And can I just say whilst I'm at it, the rule that states it's a rider's responsibility to know the race route is ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine having a Tour of Flanders without any course markings or barriers or tape and sending 176 riders off and just saying to them, look, it's your responsibility to know where you go. Good luck. I mean, it's not a randonnée, it's a professional bike race. Rant over. Almeida took control the following day though, attacking solo over the last climb of the stage and putting close to half a minute into all his key rivals. With such a strong team at the race, including Del Toro, Soler and McNulty, it was reasonably plain sailing from there on for him. Ben Healy was back to doing Ben Healy things on stage 5, attacking the breakaway he was in with 57 k's to go and maintaining his lead almost all the way to the finish despite some really big teams chasing full gas behind. He was back at it again on the final day, but he didn't quite have enough to hold them off on that occasion. Almeida and Mas put in a big dig on the final short steep climb before the finish, getting rid of the Irishman. Almeida could kind of relax at that point. He won the stage from Mas, who'd ridden himself into second place on the general classification. Schachmann rode valiantly throughout the week though to cling on to third, which was his first podium at a stage race since he won Paris-Nice back in 2021. He was slightly fortunate though in some ways that Matthias Schelmoser of Lidl Trek crashed out of the winning move on one of the wet descents that final stage. He'd had to settle for 5th in the end on GC, one place behind Florian Lipovitz, who put in another solid effort over the week. And just finally, at the Région Pays de la Loire Tour in France, Kevin Vauquelin picked up a much needed win for Arkea B&B Hotels. He won the final stage and the GC there, his 4th and 5th wins of the season so far. They also won another stage with Guernalec, while Sam Bennett won the other 2 stages, taking his season tally up to 4. Now in terms of wins this year, UAE have double that, at least, of any other team in the Men's World Tour. They sit on 27, with Lidl Trek on 13, Visma Lease Bike on 12. Intermarché are at the bottom of the table, with just 1 win so far in 2025. In the women's, SD Works have 11 so far this year, which is 4 more than UAE and Lidl Trek. Liverlula, Jayco and AG Insurance Soudal are the only World Tour teams yet to get themselves off the mark. Lucinda Stewart did win the Australian road race title, but she races for the Liv Continental team. Right, that is all for this week. I'll be back on Tuesday next week, as Monday is a bank holiday here in the UK, but I'll be wrapping up Amstel Gold and Brabantse Pijl, the start of the Ardennes Classics. See you then.